welcome to another episode of CineBeards. I'm your host, Jason Musicanth. With me, as always, are Dion van Heerden.
Hi!
And Marcus Knave.
Funny one-liner.
Oh god, that
You want to move that mic a little closer to you?
so we can better hear your zingers.
Oh, me?
Your one-liners.
Okay, I'll do that right now.
Alright,
What are we
At
talking
recording.
about today, Uncle Jason?
today, because last Friday, The Incredibles 2 was released, we're gonna be talking about animation.
Animation? But what's that, Uncle Jason?
It's picture stories, but with drawings, not real people.
Isn't that silly? Why don't they just film real people doing the shenanigans?
Yeah, you're just describing DC movies.
Oh, really? This soon?
Wow.
We're like 2 minutes into the episode.
Not even. We're like 30 seconds in. Ruined.
Look, I
Ruined.
know what our audience is here for.
Hashtag ruined.
Ruined, even.
Ruined.
Okay, yeah, so we're gonna... Oh, Jesus. We're gonna be talking about animated movies. We've each kind of like picked a style to talk about.
Marcus stole mine.
Marcus
Twice.
stole Dion's twice. And I stole Dion's never, because he hates traditional animation. So,
But
Dion-
if anyone can see me flipping him off there,
yeah.
I know these
Okay.
mics can pick that up.
So I've chosen traditional animation. Marcus?
I'm doing computer-assisted animation. Basically Pixar.
Okay.
I'm doing Pixar, you're doing stop motion.
Was I doing stop motion?
Yeah.
Oh, shit.
You stole it from me.
Yeah, no, I thought I was doing...
No, if I read it correctly, he said you take it. I'll
Really?
do. Yeah. I thought you were joking when you said Pixar.
No, I was dead serious. I was working at the time, so I may have... Oh, no, well, we posted it pretty much at the same time.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I was... Yeah.
Okay, so I guess we can kind of change the direction of the episode a little bit
It's fine.
and gear it more to CGI, because it kind of works with essentially what I was going to do for my traditional animation portion is ask, like, why don't people like traditional animation anymore?
Oh, actually, Marcus never confirms which one he's doing. You suggested he does CGI, and then I said I'll do Pixar.
Miscommunication.
Well, we are great at planning things, guys.
It's
Jason's
actually
fault,
Jason's fault.
but it's fine. I can...
No, it's cool. Like, well, we can
Okay,
just
this
discuss.
episode
We can
we're
just
talking
jam
about
them out.
CGI.
No, we're just
We
talking
can
about
just
animation in general.
Yeah, we can just
Yeah.
jam it out. Like,
Yeah, I
we
guess
can
we can.
mention Aardman and how cool Aardman is.
And how phenomenal Aardman's style was, a few years ago. And how Leica has now taken up that torch and has done amazing things in stop motion.
Yeah, Early Man wasn't super good.
Is it?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
From an animation standpoint,
Oh, it was great from an animation standpoint,
Yeah.
but like the movie as a whole, they put
Context-wise.
nothing on Leica.
nothing on a Leica.
Okay, so let's just start this off because we know like CG is taken over and stuff like that. I mean, Disney's last live-action movie was the 2011 Winnie the Pooh.
I believe you mean traditionally animated, Jason.
That's the one. I don't know what I said. Fuck you.
You said
I'm
live
sick.
action. You were wrong. You said
I
the
was
wrong
totally
thing,
wrong.
Jason.
Okay,
You're better than Jason.
traditional values animation.
Yeah, 2D.
So marriage,
Yeah.
like all the whole shebang.
That's it.
Now, when
Nuclear family.
when Jason says
pick a
live
fence?
action and means traditional animation,
Basically, when you hear me say a thing, just insert traditional
The correct
animation.
thing.
Yeah, just insert the correct thing. Use context. I don't have to do everything for you.
he's talking about traditional, what used to be hand-drawn 2D animation.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like that's died out pretty much on the mainstream circuit.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah, but like
pretty much.
I mean, and I know the reason behind that is because they really don't make much money anymore. Like the last few the last few traditionally animated movies that Disney put out were losses, except for The Princess and the Frog.
No, that wasn't
Yeah, and it
really a
didn't
success.
that
wasn't a massive
That wasn't
success.
a smashing success.
No,
Yeah.
but it didn't like lose
It
money.
didn't actively lose money.
Yeah. So I mean, I can understand why the studio stopped making it, but why did people stop going to see them?
Because people... Alright, bear with me here. It's... That's Bear Grylls imitating a bear. I like how meta you got there. Bear with me here. This might seem like a really sort of meandering sort of theory, but people are stupid.
What?
Yes, I can
that
see.
was a lot shorter than I
Yeah.
expected. Yeah, I just got straight to the point there.
I think what Dion is trying to get at is people's capacity for imagination has been stunted to such a degree that if they can't see it in all its three-dimensional glory on a screen, they can't picture it.
Nah, I think it's more just that, in all honesty, the freshest, most exciting things in sort of mainstream filmmaking, like animated filmmaking, were just being made as 3D films. Like, if you look at the time period where sort of traditional animation declined, right? There was obviously the whole like golden age, all that sort of thing. But then as soon as 3D animated films started on the rise, you had your Toy Story, you had Shrek, you had all these things. They were just these real cultural zeitgeist moments, and then there were just so many. It was a new creative field. There was a lot of what was really competing with it on the traditional animation front.
Nothing. I
Like
mean,
Princess and the Frog,
nothing they were
by
putting
the
out was
numbers.
really.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, I loved the Winnie the Pooh, but
As you
2011.
mentioned last week, yeah.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
it wasn't. Nothing about that screamed like blockbuster success.
Yeah.
So they really were. I mean, if you look at something like Tangled, I mean, I'm not a big fan of Frozen, but I mean, you look at something like Frozen.
Oh yeah, no,
These
those
are all
those are
big,
massive successes.
exciting mega hits. A lot of them are doing. If you look at Tangled, it's doing for a young audience now. It's exciting in a way that the original animated films were for their day.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, look how many CG trailers we spoke about last week.
That's true.
None.
Yeah, there were at least
one.
3.
No.
Yeah.
Halloween?
Yeah, Halloween and I can't think of another one. Halloween.
How many animated trailers were there last week?
I think it was 3.
Spider-Man?
4 if you include Spider-Man. It was because I was
How to Train
speaking.
Your
I was
Dragon,
speaking
The Lost
mostly
World.
Yeah.
CGI.
Yeah.
How to Train Your Dragon: The Lost World. Wreck-It Ralph 2. Ralph Breaks the Internet.
Sorry, it was a week ago.
Yeah.
And the Lego Movie.
Yes.
Yeah, and in Spider-Verse, yeah. And those are all 3D animated. I
Yeah.
think it's also just the cost to visual spectacle ratio is just so much better now with 3D animation. It's
Well,
so much...
Not really when you look at the budgets of them. If you look at the budget of, say, even at the time, or if you adjust for inflation or stuff like that, the price, I mean, the cost of The Princess and the Frog versus the cost of Frozen. Frozen is nearly double the cost.
Yeah, but it's also exponentially more spectacular.
Yeah, but
that's
what
what I
I'm
mean. I'm
saying
talking
is-
about a direct one-to-one, like to create an equal amount of
Price
sort
per
of
cost per
spect-
spectacle.
Yeah, that's exactly what I mean. Is the ratio between cost and spectacle is so much better for 3D animated films. Obviously, they go further and they get bigger budgets because they're getting bigger returns. But if Frozen had been made on Princess and the Frog's budget, it would still have made a ton more money, and it would still have been able to do
True.
far bigger and more exciting things. I think it's also, you have to look at it as the people that make these films are human beings. Human beings are drawn to the new exciting things, the new exciting technologies. Whereas before with the 2D animated film, if you want to do a lot of water, if you want to do a lot of shots, with cameras turning around characters, these were all sort of, every time it was this technical hurdle.
Yeah. I mean, famously with The Little Mermaid, there was a team of 2D animators on months just doing bubbles.
Yeah, that was actually the last of the Disney movies to be completely traditionally animated.
Yes.
Everything
And-
after that had some kind of, as Marcus put it, computer-generated assistance.
Yes.
Yeah.
It also makes a lot of sense. It's quite comparable to in music production, where they went from having, people always decry like, oh, where's analog? It's not quite the same because the end result is so different in animation. With audio, it's not that different. But they forget about the fact that something like Metallica's Black Album had a couple of interns sitting for months and months with razors and tape.
Yeah.
Splicing like you do in a DAW where you just splice two things together. Every one of those had to be meticulously calculated, cut with a razor, shifted, perfectly millimeters, pasted back together. Like Little Mermaid.
Oh my gosh, that sounds like a headache.
Yeah, that's literally months of guys just
I
sitting
can't believe
day
it's
after
only
day.
months.
Yeah, and a small army doing that. So same thing with Little Mermaid. Now, if you want 1,000,000 bubbles, it's like
You go into Maya, say, insert hash stroke bubbles XYZ. There, bubbles.
Yeah, and it's not like it's I'm sort of denigrating what the three. Obviously, there's a lot of artistry
there's a lot
in
of
it.
artistry
But I mean,
behind
even
it.
if you just want to mock up a scene like that, it's like that. The iteration process for you with 3D animation, you can also place your camera wherever you want.
A good example is the use of, this is going on a slight tangent, but the use of middleware in video games. Like, for example, a good example I watched, by the way, watched the No Clip documentary on Bethesda Game Studios. It's an hour and a half and it's really good. How they talked about how they used SpeedTree for Oblivion, where it basically let them procedurally generate the entire world in like a couple of days.
And then just like fix it up where they need to, or
And
just
then,
like
and then they went in and went, with the designers and said, okay, this is a good baseline, but we need to tweak these things.
And Horizon Zero Dawn did that as well. And
Oh,
they look at
interesting.
what are the areas of the world that are going to be most viewed by players, and they get the
Yes.
most polish, and then it sort of works down
Yeah.
from there. But the actual base world is procedurally generated according to certain rules that they
Yeah.
give.
wow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
technology is
That's
amazing.
really fucking
Technology
cool.
is amazing, and they use the same thing in computer-generated animation, especially with things like with backgrounds.
Oh
Things
yeah,
where-
you were telling me about The Good Dinosaur.
Well, like for example, the Good Dinosaur, where they actually used. I read up on it earlier. They actually used some elements of SpeedTree because it also works in Maya animation, which a lot of people use, and they used like the import tool in that to sort of get the basic feel for the initial storyboards, because it was a very heavily forested film, as I think very few people actually went to go see The Good Dinosaur.
I certainly didn't.
Yeah, but like it's a very like forest heavy, foliage heavy film, and that let them storyboard it much faster to get the story in, and then they spent so much time like tweaking that animation where to the point where it looks photorealistic.
But yeah, I mean, can you imagine having to build a world like that using sort of older sort of technology, like a forest that heavily, sort of that dense, being able to do that many shots from absolutely any angle using traditional means? It's, if you have a tool that can make it easier, but that will allow you to tell the same story in what is arguably a more visually spectacular fashion, why wouldn't you, as a filmmaker?
I mean, for decades now, animation, and I'll probably get crucified for this, but it's been about cutting corners for decades now.
Of course, filmmaking will always be about what is that's why so many practical effects companies have gone out of business, just because, hey, we can put CG in here. It may not, or sometimes it looks great, sometimes it doesn't look nearly as good, but at the end of the day, we're getting the same storytelling result for much less money.
Yes.
So yeah, animation, I mean, they're always going to be about cutting costs. And I mean, I should say up front, I love the shit out of traditional animation, almost as much as I love claymation. And when they happen, I appreciate them and I love them, but it doesn't make economic sense. When you can make something like How to Train Your Dragon, like imagine having to hand animate that.
Yeah, impossible.
That would take 40.
That scale, it would end up costing probably more, and you would have had a far more difficult development process, because what's up on screen is just that's the final pass.
Yeah.
You know, before that you have to do all your storyboarding and your concepting, your pre-editing, and it just makes so much sense to go 3D.
Yeah, it does, especially when you can, like I said earlier, where they use tools to generate the basic set, as with video games, and then dress it as they need it.
Yeah.
And then animate the characters separately. Yeah, in most cases.
It's also 3D. I think 3D animation, it feels to me a lot more these days, a lot more democratic than, say, traditional animation. If you are an artist and you want to pitch a film, or you want to pitch your concept to 3D animated versus hand animating it yourself, people can do far more quickly and far more, not, I want to say easy, because I keep sounding like I'm saying it's easy, but you can do so much more with your time if you're fluent in 3D animation software versus having to actually hand animate a concept. And with 3D animation, you can just quickly dive in and be like, whoops, shouldn't have used this camera angle, I'll just move the camera here, tweak some lighting accordingly, boom, I've got my new shot. Hand animation, you have to do that from scratch.
Yeah, with hand animation, you're looking at, okay, so this 1 second scene, I don't like the framing of it. Okay, that's 24 cells you need to redraw for 1 second of footage.
Yeah. Also, I think it's also a lot more work available. If you look at breaking into traditional animation, because it was on the decline, audiences weren't taking to it the way they used to. There were very, very, very few studios making traditionally animated films, and you can imagine if you're as an animator, as a creative, you're trying to break into this field. It's brutal, it's cutthroat, it's this small insular elite. Breaking in there is so difficult. So what do? Do you go to a small startup animation studio that's using 3D animation software, and that can make concepts much quicker to pitch to studios, or do you find a new career?
Yeah.
I mean, this isn't taking into account, obviously, the anime industry in Japan, because that's
its whole
that's
a totally different thing, and that's also a fucking horrifying industry.
Yeah.
Like if you just look at the episode turnaround times for on-running show like something like Dragon Ball Super, where they literally only have 2 weeks to make a full episode
for very little money.
Holy crap!
For extremely little money. And like I was reading an interview with a guy that works in anime fairly high up, who went from the US, and he talks about how people were working on shows on their wedding days.
Yeah.
And people just end up living at the studio. It just makes more sense because they don't really have money for an apartment and for their commute. So it's easier for them to just bring a sleeping bag and live at the studio.
Shit, that is ridiculous.
Yeah, and these are sort of
that's not every anime studio.
But I mean, he says that's the vast majority, and he's worked on like a lot of big titles, and that's just how it goes. It's the sort of it's that culture of of excellence, of pulling your weight, of doing your part, and they just get exploited. So, yeah, that's a whole another kettle of fish.
Yeah.
We should probably sort of let's limit this one to Western animation.
Yeah. Well, no, you're going into CG. You're also looking at similar things. I mean, there were quite a few people. I can't remember the entire story, but that didn't get any credit for work that they had done, and they got paid peanuts.
No, you're thinking of Sausage Party.
Sausage Party.
Yeah,
that's it.
You're thinking of Sausage Party.
That's the one.
Yeah.
That crass. Horrible.
Yeah. Well, I mean that's still Western.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, but what I'm saying is like sticking to Western isn't gonna eliminate the whole.
No, I'm saying I don't know anything about the anime industry.
Yeah.
That is its own kettle of fish. That's a whole different thing.
Yeah. No, it really is.
Yeah.
Like it's just the work ethics and the style of production is just so different from what we consider traditional Western animation.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's two different worlds. You literally can't compare the two.
So yeah, I mean that accounts for why 3D animation took off, and that also accounts for why people stopped going to see them, because if you've got all the new exciting voices working in a medium, they're going to be producing the new exciting films. And I'm not saying these are like classics, you know, in the like, you know, of the caliber of the Little Mermaid or something.
Yeah.
But you know, audiences want something new and fresh, and that was what Shrek was. That's what
the original Toy Story was.
Yeah.
Which, fun fact, was the highest grossing film that year.
Wow.
Well, yeah,
In the US.
New technology, same as with Avatar. New
Yeah.
technology, highest grossing film. There's a definite correlation between the two.
I mean, that was like absolutely mind blowing, and it's still the film still looks great today. It's still super watchable.
Oh yeah, Toy Story. I've got to go into a bit of a story here, but I was at the exact right age when Toy Story 1 came out. Right, I was like, what was I? Under 10. Let's go with that ballpark. And I went to go watch that movie at the big screen, and after I watched it, when it finally was available, I bought with my own pocket money. I saved up to buy Toy Story on VHS.
Wow.
Right?
Aww.
This was the mid-90s, so, you know, we didn't have a DVD
We
player
had
yet.
Betamax.
Yeah. So I bought the VHS, and I watched that movie religiously, like until the tape stopped working.
That was
That's
me.
how much
That
I
was me
watched it.
with Bugs Life, just over and over
Right?
again.
Like Toy Story was that
Wow,
to me.
the movie that I did that with was Independence Day.
That explains a lot.
It explains
Yeah.
everything makes so much sense now. But you know, with that, I was at the exact right age for that movie, and yeah, that just also means a lot to people. You know, when Toy Story came out in the mid-90s, it was so different. Like even in content from any sort of other animated film that was out there,
Yeah.
it was a new idea, like you say, was a fresh idea, and that really resonated with people.
And like 3D animation is so ubiquitous now, but at the time, I remember there just being this whole, like anything 3D animated was automatically big news. I remember seeing on TV, there were these documentaries about The Mask and the technology behind
Yes,
it. And
I remember
people
that.
were obsessed, and there were all these documentaries about how, you know, dead film actors, you know, can now be resurrected perfectly. And this was like
Gladiator.
yeah, and no, this was before that. This
Yeah.
was
Oh,
like
wow.
I was a kid.
Yeah.
Like this was just after The Mask came out. This was late 90s, and they were talking about how, in theory, you know, like dead actors can be like totally recreated. And I think they had, who did they have? I still remember them like recreating one or two actors, you know, and them saying a few lines. And if I go back and watch that now, it's probably going to look like a cutscene.
Yeah, I think one of them was Chris Farley that they said they could bring back.
Yeah, something like that.
that's
And
kinda-
they, and it was just 3D was the big, new, exciting thing. Anything 3D was automatically like a must see.
Yeah.
And it was Jurassic Park. It was just that age. And I think there was a whole generation raised on that for whom classic animation looks old-fashioned.
Yes.
It's not like, oh, that's actually so cool and so wonderful. It's just like it looks like a car from 30 years ago,
Yeah.
or clothes from 30. It just looks like old and weird and
Yeah,
alien.
you'll get that like niche group that is actually looking for that, and
Yeah,
Yeah.
you know,
yeah, but for the most
But-
part, and it's not even a conscious thing. It's just that looks outdated. It's like walking into a store and there's like a 4K HD TV and there's like an old CRT monitor, like one of those bulky ones.
Yeah.
Sure, one person in 100's going to be like, I'm going to buy that CRT and I'm going to play Duke Nukem on that
Oh
thing.
yeah, of course. I'm that guy.
Yeah, I know. But the other 99 people, they're going to sort of glance at it
Yeah.
and
Be
frown
like, what is this?
slightly, and
What
then
is this? What is this?
barely acknowledge it and look
Yeah.
at the sort of the shiny new thing.
Yeah.
And I think for them, it's just animation is 3D animation. They don't even think of it as such.
Yeah, I mean, we're looking at
Well, yeah.
something that's been mainstream since 1995.
Yeah.
You know, you can where like Toy Story was famously the first fully 3D animated theatrical release. And
yeah,
they
by
are-
the early 2000s, it was just
it
unstoppable.
was just unstoppable. It was just the norm. I mean, you're looking at. I mean, we're now in the year of our Lord 2018, right? So go back to 1995. That's like 23-year-olds now, like young adults. So there's an entire generation of children who have grown up only knowing
Yeah.
CG animation by now.
Yeah.
That's just a fact.
It's that weird cognitive dissonance I get when I talk to a younger person and they say, they like the prequels. The prequels are their Star Wars films.
Yeah.
When they were young and they were kids and they went to watch them and they were so exciting. And when they watch the original trilogy, they just feel weird and wrong and like watching old episodes of Star Trek. That's perfectly normal because it's sort of part of their formative years. They're still wrong.
Yeah,
but
no, they're still entirely wrong.
Years.
But I think another thing, if we're looking at the younger generation today as well, I mean, they would more closely liken traditional 2D animation to television shows. If you think about it from their perspective, because a lot of kids shows are still using like traditional animation, but the movies
that's actually a good point.
are CG. So for them, like subconsciously, 2D is low budget in big
or at least
asterisks.
low stakes.
Yeah.
It's like I spoke to my cousin once, and we were talking about music, and I was playing her some, like 70s, 80s stuff, and for her, it sounded like cheap. It sounded badly produced, and I discovered that music that has auto-tune, like where the vocals are auto-tuned, that sounds to them like high quality. That sounds like the authentic fancy thing, and that people whose voices don't have that sort of artifacty auto-tune thing, that sounds cheap. Regardless of if it's like Foo Fighters or whatever, like it sounds cheap and slightly indie, and like the big production stuff is auto-tune. So it's a perspective thing. So that actually makes really good sense. That the only animation they would really be watching would be, unless they have parents who have like classic Disney in their archives, would be TV shows.
Yeah. Which, by the way, if you can still find it, the Sleeping Beauty Blu-ray is phenomenal. Oh my word! It's some of the best, like upgraded visuals.
And I think, speaking of cost as well, one of the things that happened with Disney was, and one of the things that eventually helped them move to 3D animation was that 2D animation, even though the budgets were smaller because the returns were smaller, the films were still ruinously expensive. They famously moved away from, they used to have, you've seen those machines where they have the incredible depth of field.
Yes.
With like the background, like the multi-layered machines where they build up, which they eventually stopped using. Which is why you sort of have this era of Disney films, I think like into the sort of the 60s, and which look really cheap.
Yeah, which looked really flat.
Yeah, because that was just too expensive for them to do that.
Yeah. I mean, you couldn't have 7 layers of backgrounds anymore. It became prohibitively expensive.
And there was also that era of 101 Dalmatians, which really hasn't aged super well. Again, going for whatever was the cheapest form of animation at the time.
Yeah. Which arguably, in my mind, helps specifically... 101 Dalmatians specifically is helped by that style personally, because I like the almost sketchbook aesthetic to Cruella de Vil. That look just works, but that's also like artistry versus budget. It may have been a decision on a budget level, but it ended up working creatively.
But it was sort of, there wasn't really a choice. Luckily, it ended up working for the...
I mean, that's why Don Bluth animated films are so... sort of, they have their own look, because he was a very big stickler of a certain style of 2D animation. And you can tell a Don Bluth animated film when you see it. Like, he famously did the Dragon's Lair. And, that old video game, and he was responsible for The Secret of Nim. And the other one was Black Cauldron for Disney.
I absolutely love that look.
Yeah,
that's still got this real air of mystery for me. Whenever I see it, that just looks sort of, almost don't want to go rewatch them.
Yeah,
because I just have these like these mystical connotations with them.
Yeah, and then you go into other things like, I'm just gonna ramble now for a bit, but another one that was big for me when I was little was
Heavy metal.
not when I was young, but I did enjoy that style. The Brave Little Toaster, which
I vaguely remember that.
yeah, that was pitched by John Lasseter to Disney.
He was actually one of the reasons he left Disney originally.
That was I watched the documentary like just this week. He basically pitched the Brave Little Toaster to Disney and said, I want to do it using computer graphics.
Yeah.
And the head of the department then told him, look, if you can't make it either faster or cheaper with computers than with traditional, we're not interested. And he went downstairs and got fired.
Yeah,
Wow.
that's one of the things. He was originally pitching using computers, and the funny thing is, in the years after his departure, they started using computers for motion shots, for moving through the building, for background stuff like that. They started integrating it slowly. It makes me think of when Tron was denied its Academy Awards because it used computers, and that was cheating.
Yeah, it was cheating. Or with which one was it? Labyrinth. Also, where people were like, with that owl shot, which was also famously like the first CG animal on screen.
Oh, yeah?
With the owl flying, and they were like,
That's another one that just feels like magic and mystical in my mind.
No, Labyrinth
I don't
holds
wanna.
up.
Does
It
it?
holds up.
Okay,
I've got it. It holds up,
nice.
and it's only.
So that was the first.
That was the first CG animal on screen,
Wow.
if I recall correctly.
Good excuse to watch it again.
There we go.
That and David Bowie is just
David
amazing. He's just spectacular as Jareth the Goblin King.
Isn't that movie just like 90% Bowie package?
Yes, worth it.
Worth it.
But yeah, Brave Little Toaster got him fired, and then he was bumming around, and then he joined Pixar, which was bought by ILM, and then they broke away from ILM because George, I want to say Luke Lucas?
George Newman. I'm thinking
Lucas.
George Newman.
George Newman.
Luca.
No,
Luca.
not Newman. That's the singer. You're thinking of George Newman.
Oh, George Newman.
New man.
Yeah,
He was
George
just
New
recently
Man.
born at that point.
Yes.
We got the nickname as an infant and it just stuck.
Yeah, that's where Pixar started as a subsidiary of ILM, basically. And then they broke off, and then Steve Jobs was like, here's money, be
Yeah.
independent.
Yep.
And then Disney was like, yeah, it's a long story.
Yeah, they tried to hire Lasseter back, and he
Yeah.
was like, nah.
No.
Nah.
Yeah, he
Suck
was
it.
like, no, I want my creative freedom. And then,
Well, and also just stick it up your ass.
yeah, he eventually came back to Disney, though.
Yeah, but I mean,
Full
at that
circle.
point, he could do it on his terms.
Yeah, but that was because Bob Iger, who was the new CEO back in the early 2000s, was like, we need Pixar, and we just need to have them do what they do.
Bob Iger, the more I read about him, the more I realize how much we have to thank him for.
Yeah,
Like, obviously bringing Pixar into the Disney fold, bringing Marvel into the Disney fold,
bringing the
Lucasfilm,
Muppets into the fold.
Muppets.
Star Wars.
Yeah, so, yeah, Lucasfilm. So,
Yeah,
I mean, that's quite the fucking
it's
legacy.
quite the innings for a CEO.
And that he's the one that, obviously Perlmutter was in there when he was sort of more hands-on with Marvel. He was stuffing the composers, and he was doing all that. And between Feige and Iger, they sort of worked Perlmutter out, and he got to have the Inhumans and whatever. He could go fuck off
Ooh,
and
he
do
was
that.
so proud of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's why now they can actually compensate composers properly, have the epic scores they've been having of late, have the sort of creative freedom. So that's quite the legacy and approach.
Yeah.
Sheesh. Yeah, I've actually forgot that he was the CEO when Lasseter came back.
Yeah. It was, because at that time, the previous CEO was He also had a last name like Iger.
Scrooge McDuck.
Michael Eisner was the previous CEO. And he refused to renegotiate with Pixar. I was watching the documentary, like Bob Iger.
Is this the documentary that came with a short film collection?
Yes, this the Pixar story, which was originally released.
So good.
So good. Basically, Iger, in his first month of being CEO, was like calling Steve Jobs and saying, "We need to talk about Pixar."
Nice.
Because famously, his predecessor was like refusing to renegotiate with Pixar because he said Pixar were being greedy.
Dumbass.
Oh, Eisner.
It's actually...
He made all the mistakes. In fact, it's because of Michael Eisner that DreamWorks exists.
Yeah.
Because the lead, or the creative lead of Disney Animation was Katzenberg at that time. And he kept butting heads with Eisner, and then he went off and started DreamWorks Animation.
Dumbass. I actually was thinking the other day as well, when I was thinking about Pixar and Marvel, it's actually interesting how Pixar... I mean, I know there was sort of like with the monster films in the 50s and with some of the westerns that had happened, but Pixar is also one of the early examples of a shared universe. Not sort of blatantly, but like all the little shared things.
Like little hinting
like
towards it. The little car, the pizza.
You're looking for like the planet delivery. What is the Pizza Planet?
Pizza Planet delivery car,
the delivery car. Watching each film, wondering who John Ratzenberg is going to voice.
Yeah.
I mean, I know those are sort of silly little things, but there are lots of them. You know, like the toy, like Sid would show up in another film, and some of the toys would be in that film. And if you think about it, just the excitement, I loved looking for those Easter eggs.
Yeah.
And someone would tell me, you know, like, oh, the Pizza Planet delivery truck is in every film, and I go and rewatch them, and I'd be like, where? And then I find it, and I'd be like, it's fucking cool. And now, you know, Marvel's sort of just taking that thrill and doing it even more blatantly.
Yeah.
But I love that that both of them are sort of under the Disney banner, and they're both these ones that are sort of doing these sort of little shared universe experiments.
Yeah, but it's like how it's famous. You can look it up on YouTube, the Pixar theory, where there are people who have dedicated their lives to making a timeline of the Pixar universe.
Yeah, like how the cars are actually bugs or something like that.
Yeah, how basically the short version is Toy Story is the last world before the apocalypse.
Oh shit.
And that's when WALL-E happens, and then decades beyond WALL-E, you get cars where the cars have become sentient because they've evolved.
Oh my god.
It's like, it goes deep, and it is fascinating.
That's amazing.
And
I think the final one is Brave, isn't it?
No, Brave is the earliest, but...
But then why does it have the carving of the car?
I'm assuming Good Dinosaur would be the earliest.
Yeah. But
Brave.
basically then they retcon, like, no, Monsters Inc., like, the doorways isn't like between two different worlds. They actually function as time machines.
Oh my gosh.
Which is why you've got the carving of Sully and Mike in one shot of Brave.
Nice.
In the witch's cabin, where she's got like carvings of them or something.
Like, I don't think anyone seriously believes that these things are intended, but I do love where people can set up these vast houses.
Oh, there's some really good fan theories out there.
I love that.
Like, not watertight, but like entertaining to read.
Yeah, no, it's very fun to watch those theories. Like,
nice.
Yeah. Or because people love hunting Easter eggs.
Another thing about Pixar and just about 3D animated films is, though there were a lot of duds, they generally, box office wise and creatively, have been just incredibly successful. Like, there is just this consistent quality to them. Which I've always found interesting, because I would have thought, I know there are a lot like that sort of get released and they're out for a week and then they relegated to sort of to the history books, but there's not really like
a standout stinker other than maybe Cars 2.
Now there's Emoji Movie. I still maintain Cars 2 it shouldn't have been released as a Pixar,
but you said it entertained you somewhat.
Well, I think Cars 2 is a near perfect cartoon.
Yeah.
Like, it's a near perfect children's film. It's just that of the Pixar films, it has the least to offer adults. But like watching that film in a cinema where there were children was like pretty spectacular. And like really, like as far as children's entertainment go, it's still absolutely top tier. It's just bottom tier Pixar.
Yeah.
But if you look at like
which is like a big like up to Pixar, because I mean,
yeah,
when they're off their game, it's still a well-made, entertaining film.
yeah, it's still I mean, their duds have been so few and far between, and the highs have just been fucking. That's the other thing is if you look at Toy Story, the first sort of commercial full-length 3D animated film, it's a masterpiece.
Yeah.
Not just technologically, but of storytelling.
No, it is perfect.
It's a fucking masterpiece, and
Yeah.
I mean it was basically a perfect trilogy.
No, it is right up there. It is my favorite trilogy.
And they've had, I mean, there's been Ratatouille and there's been WALL-E. They've just been like, they just knock it out up. Fucking
Yeah.
Chiquino score winning the Academy Award. It's just they've just consistently knocked it out of the park, Inside Out, and because they do 2 a year now, on average, sometimes one over 2 years, but they'll have in 1 year they had Inside Out and The Good Dinosaur. Now, who gives a shit about The Good Dinosaur being a flop when Inside Out is a masterpiece?
Yeah.
Who cares? It's a commercial and a critical success.
Yeah.
Yeah, and even though the Good Dinosaur was, a bit nothing, like I have seen it. I think I'm the only one here who has seen it.
Yeah.
But I mean, it still has artistic merit.
Yeah, in the grand scheme of things, it's still, from what I've heard, still a good film. It's just a middling Pixar.
It's a middling Pixar, but like you should watch that movie just for the landscapes. Like it is top tier background work.
Yeah. So it's. Yeah, I mean, aside from 1 or 2 sort of stretches where Disney was sort of really on a roll with their 2D animation, there's never really been anything like this. Because in the West, Disney was always the main game in town with 2D animation, simply because it's so expensive.
Yeah.
They basically so I guess the fortunes of animation are sort of 2D animation are very closely tied to Disney.
Yes.
Yeah, very, very much so.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at it,
2D animation, theater experiences.
Yeah, theater experiences. I mean, if you look at the last time they were really big, 2D animation Disney, you're looking at the Disney Renaissance of the early 90s with Little Mermaid and Aladdin and The Lion King, Beauty and the Beast. But what people forget is that's when 2D animation studios were also having their heydays. I mean, that's when we got All Dogs Go to Heaven and A Land Before Time.
The Iron Giant was a few years later than that, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Iron Giant was 97?
No, Iron Giant was 99.
Oh. Yeah, well, close enough.
Like
Was that pure 2D?
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Iron
haven't
Giant,
seen it.
It had a lot of CGA, as Marcus put it,
Okay.
but it was mainly traditionally animated.
Nice.
Yes.
I need to watch that again. That's also Brad Bird, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, when you're looking at the history of animation is in Western animation is intrinsically tied to Disney in one shape or form. I mean, we could go into like European animation, but that's a whole different.
And that's also not.
thing.
Yeah, that's also not the sort of mainstream cultural impact.
Exactly. I mean, you're looking at like the French have some phenomenally beautiful animated films. Most famously, I think for most people would be Triplets of Belleville. Like European sensibilities are also different than. Yeah, it's actually a very fascinating thing. We should probably take a look at it at some point in the future.
Speaking of European animation, sorry to follow you in the rede. I recently watched for the first time, I know it's 3D, but Asterix and the Mansions of the Gods,
Yes.
the French one.
Yeah.
Hot fucking damn, that is good.
Yeah.
Wow. That style was just phenomenal.
Yeah, exactly. Like that's the other thing. Like Western animation like mainstream Western animation is basically Disney, DreamWorks, and who else? Arguably Sony Animation.
Yeah.
And that's basically it. But if you really want to nerd out, you go to find the smaller companies. I mean, that's when you start looking at animation houses out of France, and when you start looking at Leica Productions, who have like completely modernized stop motion to an extent where for some people it's indistinguishable. That's the word.
You got it.
From CG. I mean, I know people who like are floored when they find out that Kubo and the Two Strings is stop motion and not CG.
Yep. I've seen a bunch of those videos on YouTube where they've got like the little time lapses of them making the
Leica
scenes.
does
I love that movie so much.
I mean, you should, if you're listening to this, you should watch every Leica stop motion film.
What else have they done?
The
Coraline
Box
was one of
Trolls, and
Wasn't Coraline one of those?
Coraline was there.
Oh, that was
Coraline was their, I think, their first commercially released one. And Paranorman was also there,
Yeah.
which was also, damn, that was a fun movie.
Yeah, they make good stuff.
They make good stuff. To me, Leica today feels like how Pixar felt in the early days. You know, this upstart that's doing its own thing with all this like creative energy behind it.
Has someone bought them out yet?
Not yet.
Good. Then they're still in there. They're still in the pure phase.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's also
Before they start
Cartoon
giving everyone
Saloon. That's also like a fairly recent animation company that sticks to hand drawn stuff.
Which one's that?
Cartoon Saloon.
What have they done?
They have done Song of the Sea
Yes.
and The Secret of Kells. I think that was their first one.
Ah, yes.
And then they released a third film last year, but the name escapes me. But they are super good, and the animation is beautiful.
No, I'm thinking about.
Are they feature length?
Feature length, yeah.
Nice.
No, sorry, I just thought about Studio Ghibli again with the one director who recently broke away at 5mm per second. Recently, and Garden of Words a couple of years ago. But that's also going back into anime and a whole different kettle of fish.
But yeah,
But I mean, you can't. Yeah, you also when you're talking about animation, you can't deny the influence of Eastern studios like Studio
Yeah,
Ghibli
Studio Ghibli is
on
like.
Western animators.
I mean, a lot. You'll hear in any sort of interview with any sort of head of those companies. It's always like.
It's
the Studio
always like
Ghibli.
singing the praises of
Yeah,
Ghibli.
Singing
Yeah.
the praises of Miyazaki and his early collaborators. I mean, those early films were phenomenal, and they hold up.
Yep.
Studio Ghibli is
Grave of the
Buddy
Fireflies
Guy,
makes me cry
and
every
Pixar
time.
is
How does
the Rolling Stones.
if Grave of the Fireflies doesn't make you cry, then you need to be booked into a mental hospital. Because that is the most depressing animated film in existence.
Yep. Yeah. Agreed.
I'll avoid it at all costs.
You should. You'll cry like
I'll
a baby.
avoid it. It's fine.
Almost
It's
as
beautifully
badly,
done, though.
Yeah, almost as badly as I cry at the end of Toy Story 3 every damn time.
It's fine. I'll watch it, but on mute, and I'll play yakety sax to counteract it.
Yeah. Iron Giant always manages to pull a tear out of my eye.
Yeah.
Yeah, we actually have a friend, Zane,
Yes.
who as a child watched the movie and was so sad. You haven't seen it yet, have you?
Iron Giant.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. At the end when he explodes himself to like save the town,
What spoilers?
Zane got so sad that he immediately turned it off,
Yeah.
and for like a decade he thought that was it, like the Iron Giant was dead.
Yeah.
He never saw like the limbs pulling itself back together, so he was like traumatized by this.
For years.
Oh man,
It's
it's
beautiful.
like people that didn't watch the post-credit stinger where ET comes back and he joins the kids' softball team.
Yeah.
Oh
Yeah. Oh, the crossover with Air Bud was just
yeah.
Brilliant. Brilliantly.
Oh,
So
dude.
topical.
I can't believe they made a trilogy out of it, and like
Yeah.
only the first two broke $1 billion.
Oh, man.
there's nothing in the rules that says an alien can't play basketball.
Oh man, we still need to marathon all of the Airbuds.
Oh god.
Oh, we have to.
do. I'm terrified, but we do.
Oh. It terrifies me. It scares me.
Yeah. I think we've taken a pretty comprehensive look at
Just
Or
chatting about.
animation.
I think it's basically just an excuse for us to get hyped for Incredibles 2.
Yeah.
which
You,
has
Brad
come out
Bird.
by the time this comes out.
Yes,
Yes.
today. We just watched it. It was great. Did we?
No,
We're gonna watch it,
You're
it's
in
great.
Havanus.
Oh no. Oh shit. Yes, I am. I'm not even here. What's going on?
You're like miles away from a cinema.
No, there's a cinema there, but it shows 2 movies, both of them from like 2014.
Yeah, and no, thanks. I'll wait till I get back and IMAX it. Thank you very much.
Yep.
Yep.
I'll drive back and IMAX it.
All right. So my recommendation for this week is obviously Incredibles 2.
Ah, you always get the easy ones.
Yeah.
Oh, and if you can get a hold of it, the Song of the Sea is just really fucking good. Dion?
A Quiet Place out on digital.
Ooh.
Nice.
Yeah, boy.
Ooh. I am ready for some spooks.
Spooks.
And
Marcus?
yeah, from my side, looking at things from childhoods and animation, that gives me a good reason to plug the toys that made us.
Oh yeah.
On
Ooh,
Netflix,
yes,
the
yes.
second set of 4 episodes, which cover Transformers, Lego, Hello Kitty, and Star Trek toys that came out a couple of weeks ago. They're all really good, and you should just watch all 8 of them, actually.
I just might do that.
You should.
You might.
And coming this Friday, super hyped myself for Luke Cage Season 2.
Yes.
Give me more of that hip-hop infused blaxploitation.
Yes.
Yes, please.
Good stuff. Yeah, the main villain of which is actually kind of funny, which I wouldn't spoil, but yeah.
Cool.
Nice.
Cool. Dion, plugs?
At Dion van Hidden 1, where I'm assuming I'm still angry about Command and Conquer Rivals.
That's a fair bet.
Fair bet.
Marcus?
At Viking of Science, where I'm probably still pissed off at Microsoft not giving me their exclusives.
Okay, and you can follow me at JMusicAnth, where I'm probably still not tweeting.
Hooray!
Cool.
That was a
Krabbies.
joke, by the way, because
Krabbies.
Microsoft doesn't have exclusives.
Ew. Timely stuff.